David, can you tell me something about the work we've done on the boat to date?
Well, we started off with the boat outside and we took the cabin off as a start so that we can see what we're about. And then when we got the boat into the shed, we took the iron keel off, which meant cutting all the bolts because they were all rusty. And then after that we had to take what we call a false keel off, which is part of the keel underneath the boat. And again, all the bolts were rusty and there were a lot of steel screws in which were difficult to get out. Once we got that off, we started to take the frames out the inside, and some of the frames are sawn, what you call sawn frames, and they're made in sections, and the frames in between those are steam bent frames, so we have to cut the rivets off, which are copper fastened, and take the nails out to get the frames out. So that's what we've sort of done to date. We've taken some of the planks out, the bottom two planks. The first one's called a garboard, took that out, and then the one above it because they were badly split. We've also taken the shear strake out, which is a very top plank on the top sides, because that was all split as well. And after that we've made patterns of the frames, the sawn frames. We can only take so many out at once, otherwise we lose the shape of the boat. So that's what we've done there. On the stern of the boat, what we call the counter, pieces have been put in short pieces, which isn't good practice. They've also been put in with steel screws, which are what builders would use, which are not ideal in a boat that's in salt water because they corrode and they're very difficult to get out. So instead of putting long lengths of planking like they should have done, they've cut, say, 4 planks in a straight line across the boat and just put pieces in and just generally done a bad job of it. So it's been difficult to undo the steel screws because in salt water they just corrode, and while they're good to put in when they're brand new, you can't get them out later. So that's something that we have to replace by putting longer lengths in and stagger the joints to make it a strong job. So that's the sort of thing that you don't know about until you start working on it.
Severn was under the water for 13 years. She sunk in the Mersey in 1914 and was under the water for 13 years. How has that helped save her wood work?
Well, that's helped because any wood that's soaked in salt water or even in salt air tends to preserve it. Just like in the old days on sailing ships, they used to use salted meat to preserve it when they're on a long voyage. And so the fact that she's been led on the Mersey for all that time in the mud, it's prevented her going rotten. And pitch pine is a very resinous type of wood, so it's kept it in good condition. So they're lucky really that that's the case. If she'd have been in fresh water like on a lake, it probably would have rotted away. But as it is, she's been preserved. Well, the frames in the boat, every other frame, there's a sawn frame which is made up out of oak, solid pieces of oak to join together with one alongside it, which we call a doubler. So that's the frame on the forward end here. And then in between the frames there's a steam frame which is fastened with copper nails, copper rivets. So we're going to replace all those frames, and the sawn frames are going to be replaced with laminated oak frames, which will be full length frames from the top to the bottom of the boat and make it much stronger in the future than what it was in the past. And then in between we'll put steamed frames in like we did before, which is these frames here. And so that's how the job's going to be done. And the new frames will be fastened with bronze screws rather than iron nails like they've been fastened in the past, because the iron nails in the frames, when they go into oak, there's a lot of acid in oak, so that tends to corrode the nails. So we have to take the old frame out, take the nails out, fill the holes up, and then put new bronze screws in when we fasten them back again. So that'll be a better job. The ballast keel was about half a ton of iron, which was fastened with 4 probably wrought iron bolts, because they used to use wrought iron years ago, and they were all corroded. We couldn't get any of the nuts off because they were corroded, so we had to make a gap with wedges between the wood keel and the iron keel in order to get the iron keel off. And we had to get what you call a sabre saw with a demolition blade in it, in that narrow gap, and saw the bolts off in order to get the keel off. So then we take the keel off and lower it down and move it out the way of the boat. And then on either end of the keel, at the forward end of the keel, there's a kind of big wedge-shaped piece of wood which you call a false keel, which sort of carries the shape of the profile of the boat up into the stem. And then on the aft end there's a similar piece of wood which is a bit shorter, which holds the bottom fitting for the rudder to sit into on the aft end of the keel. So the bottom edge of the keel is all in one slope from end to end when these pieces of wood are on. So the keel will be getting sandblasted to get all the rust off it, and it'll be epoxied with epoxy tar paint with about 6 coats before it goes back on. And then the new bolts going in will be stainless steel, so they'll be of a marine grade stainless steel, so they won't corrode, and that's how it'll be fastened. And then the false keel either end will again be fastened with stainless steel bolts, so that the whole thing's strong again in the future. When we come to laminate the frames, we get several pieces of oak laminates, in this case 5mm thick, and spread glue on them along here with a brush. It's going to use resorcinal resin glue, which is a kind of reddish brown kind of liquid with a hardener and a resin. And we put several laminates together. In the case of these frames, it would be about 12 laminates of 5mm thick. And then this is just an example of a piece similar size. And then we bend it round this jig to get the shape of the frame and pull it together with G-cramps and tighten them all together like this on here. And then they have to be pulled round to fit perfectly to this. So we glue them together, and then after about 12 hours when the glue's set, we take them off and clean the glue off the edge by putting them through a thickness planer, and then they'll be fitted into the boat, and each one has to be bevelled on the backside to suit the planking, depending on where it is on the boat. When they're up forward, they'll have quite a lot of bevel on, and the frames that go in the middle of the boat won't have much bevel on at all. And then the ones in the aft end of the boat will have a lot of bevel on. There'll be if you looked at them in section, it'd be like a parallelogram in sort of section, whereas the middle ones will be like a square section, and then they'll be fastened into the boat to give it more strength.
David, how much are you enjoying doing this exciting project on this boat that's an important part of Arnside's heritage?
Well, I've always fancied building a prona, which they were built at Arnside, so this is the nearest thing to it in a way, because it's a very similar shape to a Morecambe Bay prona with a counter stern and a similar shaped stem. And it's just nice to do a boat up from what is looking like a wreck at the moment to looking in pristine condition when she's finished. So it's always a good thing to do. It's nice to build new boats from scratch, but it's also nice to do a boat up from this kind of state that's been bodged up by a lot of people in the past, and we do a proper job of it, and it'll maybe give it another 100 years use.